So I want to talk to you guys about the Azov Battalion. The Nazis are becoming more and more prominent, and their presence is growing in Ukraine as the conflict continues and as it lingers. Because even if this conflict goes to a pause due to some kind of peace talks, the tension is still going to be there, and the animosity is still going to be there, especially with the volatile situation in which fighting can break out again at any time. This is usually the nature of such conflicts. Azov Battalion really popped up in 2014 with the Euromaidan revolution. And also with the Russian annexation of Crimea, and also the outbreak of the war in eastern Ukraine, or to be more specific, the Donbas region of Ukraine. Ever since then, the Azov Battalion has had a position within Ukrainian politics, political discourse, and also within the Ukrainian military, given the fact that the Azov Battalion was integrated into the Ukrainian National Guard. Some years after the outbreak of the war, the Nazis in Ukraine kind of declined a little bit in their popularity, although they still held a presence. Now, with an actual Russian military presence within Ukraine, Azov has gotten a revival in popularity and is also growing, given the fact that this is no longer just a war between the Ukrainian government and pro-Russian separatists in the east, but rather an actual conflict between the Russian military and the Ukrainian military. There was an interesting article that was published on Militant Wire today, and it talks about the activities, or some of the activities, of the Azov Battalion, and I want to read to you guys some excerpts from that article. But before I do, I just want to also mention that President Volodymyr Zelensky recently called for foreign fighters to come to Ukraine to help in the defense of his country. There was an article about this announcement on Vice magazine, and it reads, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky's extraordinary appeal for international volunteers to join the fight against the Russian invasion has generated thousands of expressions of interest from would-be foreign fighters, according to the Ukrainian government. And this is not really that surprising, given the fact that they are so many people online who are deeply sympathetic for Ukraine, and also deeply angry with Russia, especially with the fact that the Western world has been deeply in rivalry with Russia for many, many decades. In the United States, we've had the Cold War, but even before the Cold War, there was definitely a bias towards Russia and a suspicion towards Russian advancement. If you can go back to history, you will see that the U.S. government supported Japan in the First Russo-Japanese War from 1904 to 1905, and the United States saw Japan as a check against Russian expansion. So this goes beyond just communism and the Cold War. This is truly a rivalry between the West and the East, and to be more specific, NATO and between NATO and Russia, or really between the American Empire and the Russian Federation, which also wants to revive its empire as well. So with such bias towards Russia in the West, it's not surprising to see people in Western countries actually wanting to go to Ukraine to join militias and paramilitaries to fight against Russian forces. The article from Vice goes on to say, On Sunday, Zelensky announced the establishment of an international legion for volunteers and encouraged people to join it. Quote, "This will be the key evidence for your support for our country," he said. So the article from Militant Wire talks about some of the more recent activities of the Azov Battalion. In one part of the article, it reads, "With the announcement of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's initiative to form an international brigade of militants from abroad, Azov instructed their followers to travel through Poland to staging and logistics points in designated cities to be equipped with weapons, uniforms, and supplies before joining the Azov Territorial Defense Unit." So now that the president of Ukraine has invited non-Ukrainians to travel to Ukraine to join the fight against Russia, you have also people wanting to join fascist paramilitaries like the Azov Battalion. And also I want to mention that Azov is not the only Nazi paramilitary in Ukraine. It's definitely the most prominent one. It's definitely the one that has the most fame and media attention, but there are also others. There is also Centuria and Right Sector, and there's a number of other ones. All of these paramilitaries, these Nazi paramilitaries, are interconnected, and they have membership that overlaps. For example, you'll see Andrei Belitsky in the Azov Battalion, but you'll also find out that Belitsky helps to train Centuria. These groups definitely network together, and they overlap in terms of membership and leadership. And here's the thing also that I want to add. The conflict that broke out in 2014, one thing that it did was it revealed the strong Nazi presence in Ukraine. So in America, we talk a lot about white supremacy, and some of it is true, some of it is false. But at the same time, the good thing about the United States is that we have a history. We definitely have a history of racism in this country. We had the KKK. We had a civil war over slavery. But I think that the United States has come a long ways. But in Ukraine, you can go back just decades, and you will see that there were so many Ukrainians who were members of the SS who collaborated with the Nazis. You had the UON, the Ukrainian Organization of Nationalists, and you had numbers of other major paramilitary organizations in the Ukraine that not only collaborated with the Nazis, but also took part in genocide, for example, in the slaughter of 100,000 ethnic Poles. And they murdered Polish people because they were Polish, and they wanted to ethnically cleanse all non-Ukrainians in lands that they believed belonged to them, because after World War I, the Allies designated certain territories to Poland, territories that the Ukrainians believed belonged to them. And so now you had all these Ukrainians living under the Polish government. There was the Polish-Ukrainian War from 1918 to 1919. In which the Poles won and took more territory from the Ukrainians. So now you had more ethnic Ukrainians living under Polish control. And so you had all these disgruntled ethnic Ukrainians living under a Polish occupation. Regardless of that, there was actually a moment of collaboration between the Poles and the Ukrainians against the Bolsheviks. They lost against the Bolsheviks, but nonetheless, there was a collaboration between Ukrainians and Poles. So it's not a history entirely made up of hatred. There are points of collaboration, but nonetheless, the moments of violence and animosity and genocide definitely outnumber the moments of harmony, especially when you get into the 1920s and 1930s. And so that animosity, that sort of fascism and Ukrainian nationalism, ultra-nationalism and racism, it's still in Ukraine. There are many people, especially in Western Ukraine, who admire the Ukrainian fascist who murdered Polish people and Jews and Russians. They are people in the Ukraine who definitely admire that history. And so that spirit lives on, and it's very strong. And one thing that the conflict that broke out in 2014 did was it lifted up the lid, or really I should say the lid blew up or blew off. And what was what was exposed was this very strong Nazi sympathy. And I'm definitely not going to sit here and say that all Ukrainians are this way, but what I will say is that there is definitely a substantial presence of Nazis and people sympathetic to their cause in the Ukraine. I've been following Ukrainian neo-Nazi paramilitary groups on Telegram. I was actually surprised to see how many tens of thousands of followers these groups will have. I think there was one Azov Battalion Telegram group that I found that had like 36 or 32,000 followers. So it's pretty crazy. They like to post photos of themselves with guns and training. And here's the thing is that the Azov Battalion got a lot of prominence in Ukraine, not just because they were hardcore patriots, but also the main reason was because the Azov Battalion was so instrumental in helping the Ukrainian armed forces fight against the pro-Russian forces in 2014. The Azov Battalion was involved in most of the major battles that took place in the war over Donbass and also the war over Crimea. For example, in the Battle of Mariupol. And the Azov Battalion was extremely instrumental in gaining victories for the Ukrainian armed forces, because the Ukrainian military before the Azov division was extremely underpaid and undertrained, and they didn't really put up a great fight against the pro-Russian forces in the Ukraine. The Azov Battalion, with their private funding and their private training, were able to efficiently act as a backbone and as a support for the Ukrainian military, and they were very effective and definitely significant in major victories. So at that point, realizing how effective they were in battle, the Ukrainian government integrated Azov into the National Guard. And Azov Battalion's instrumentality in the battles for the Ukrainian armed forces gave them a prominent position within Ukrainian society. So I want to read on some of the excerpts from the article from Militant Wire. So, for example, it says here, another notable development has been the online back and forth between Azov and Chechen soldiers. On the Russian side, it is unclear how the exchanges began, but audio statements reportedly made by Chechen soldiers taunting Azov essentially told of how they look forward to hunting the nationalists. In response, Sergei Korotkik, a figure associated with Azov Battalion, released multiple videos of him wielding weapons, goading on the Chechens, at one point reportedly saying that he will play football with their heads. A video posted on February 27th, which was also shared by the verified Ukrainian National Guard Twitter account, showed Azov fighters coating their bullets with pig grease to kill Kadyrov orcs. And Kadyrov is he's like the governor of Chechnya. Chechnya is a state of the Russian Federation. As invading forces have been moving to surround Mariupol, the information warfare between Azov Battalion and the Russian side has been intensifying. Azov posted photos of dead civilians they claimed had been killed by Russian shelling, as well as images of destroyed houses. The group promised reprisals, saying, quote, "The Russians will be punished for this shortly. Let's take revenge for everyone. We will not forgive any victims. We will destroy hundreds of invaders for every killed Ukrainian." And I want to keep in mind also that the Azov Battalion, when they speak in this way, they're not bluffing. These people are not full of crap. They have murdered people in horrific ways. I saw a video years ago, and this is when I first heard about Azov. It was back in, I want to say 2014 or early 2015. Somebody from Serbia sent me a video of Azov fighters literally crucifying somebody because they were pro-Russian. And they nailed this guy into a cross, they lift the cross up, and then they light this man on fire. It's really, really horrific. There was a video that came out a few days ago, I believe it's from the city of Mariupol in Crimea, actually shows Azov Battalion fighters stopping somebody at a checkpoint. they stopped this car at a checkpoint, and then they're pulling this guy and this girl out of the car. They are being very physical with them. They're essentially accosting these people, and then the vehicle behind this car, from which the camera is filming, the driver of this vehicle just hits the accelerator and just drives off, and they actually open fire on the vehicle. It's pretty crazy. What I read was that Azov Battalion has been blocking people from leaving the city of Mariupol. I don't know why. So it goes on to say that the Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konoschenkov made counter allegations saying, quote, from 4 p.m. to 4:20 p.m. on February 26th, Ukrainian nationalists of the Azov Battalion carried out strikes using Grad multiple launch rocket systems on the residential quarters of the Sartana populated locality in a Mariupol and school, number 8 of the city of Mariupol. As a result of the attack, several residential houses have been destroyed and there are fatalities among civilians. To lift the spirits of their forces and to try, and this is from the article, to lift the spirits of their forces and to try and intimidate their enemies, Azov posted pictures of their militants posing with a dead Russian soldier and videos of them blowing up an enemy military vehicle, plus showing tanks they destroyed. To demoralize the enemy, Azov posted a video on how on February 28th of captured soldiers and threatened to behead them. They also published pictures of their fighters in a tank, accompanied by a claim that they have destroyed multiple Russian military vehicles. And that's the end for the excerpts from the article. These people aren't kidding when they threaten people with violence because they have murdered people. These people are butchers. And the Azov Battalion is full of paganism. They want to bring back pre-Christian Slavic religion. They want to bring back the worship of Perun, the storm god. And Perun was one of the prominent deities in the ancient pre-Christian Indo-European Slavic pantheon. And they want to revive the worship of this deity. It's very much like the Scandinavian neo-Nazis who want to revive the worship of Odin, Freya, and Loki, and all these pre-Christian Scandinavian Germanic deities. This is nothing really new, although I would say it's more than likely that such a movement is more popular now than it was decades ago. But this has been growing for a long time. So back in the first half of the 20th century, there was a Ukrainian guy by the name of Volodymyr Shayan, who in 1943 founded a neo-pagan paramilitary called the Order of the Knights of the Sun God. And his goal was to have this group in the fighting against the Soviets and the Poles during the Second World War. So there were definitely pagan Ukrainian Nazis back in the first half of the 20th century. So this is not something that's entirely new. And then also in this Ukrainian ultranationalist war, or this pursuit to genocide the Poles, a lot of the killing of Polish people began under the German occupation of Poland. And when the Germans were occupying Poland, the Ukrainian nationalists were spreading leaflets around, and this is what one of the leaflets stated: "Exterminate the Poles, Jews, and communists without mercy. Do not pity the enemies of the Ukrainian national revolution." And there was another line from these pamphlets that stated, "Nation, know that Moscow, Poland, Magyars, Hungarians, Jews are your enemies. Annihilate them." So this was the spirit that possessed the old Ukrainian fascists of the first half of the 20th century, of the 1940s. And these Ukrainian Nazis today, they have the same exact spirit. Nothing has really changed. And as the conflict continues on, so will the continuity of their growing popularity. Even if the fighting pauses because of some peace talks, the hatred is still going to be there, and it's still going to be lingering and simmering like a covered pot that is on top of a stove. Think of it like the recent war between the Armenians and Azeris. There were peace talks, sure. There was a ceasefire, sure. But the hatred is still there, and it is extremely vicious and thick. It's thick in the air. And so in that sort of situation, when hatred is still around, volatility still transpires, and the situation can go from temporary peace to viciousness literally at any moment, at any day. So the neo-Nazis in the Ukraine, they are gaining prominence, and recently Vice magazine did a little documentary on, and I think this documentary came out about 2 months ago. It shows the Azov battalion and their training, but it also shows this Swedish guy who his name is Robin Carroll, and he was actually I think a small-time journalist in Sweden writing about some neo-pagan artwork. And he actually moved to Ukraine to join the Azov.
The Great Germany before, in the 1920s, is a revival of the Indo-European soul. Mm-hmm. And it's all happening here in Ukraine.
Afterward, we rode back to the Azov base in northern Kyiv, where Azov commanders had allowed Robin to stay as a potential recruit.
We are Aryans, and we will rise again. That's a way of life, And after the war in Germany, we went back to the benches, school benches. But now he will rise again.
There is definitely this growing paganism. There are a lot of Ukrainian ultranationalists who are Christians, but at the same time, how much of their Christianity is involved in their ideology, how much of their ideology is actually Christian. I would say that their ideology is centered around nation and race more than anything. That's basically one of the key elements of nationalism. It's that the nation comes before everything. The nation is above everything. And that's what we're dealing with here in the Ukraine. It really makes you wonder, when Putin said that his goal was not just demilitarization, but denazification, he really... there's actually something definitely to be said about that, given the significant presence of Nazis in the Ukraine. Anyway, yeah, that's my video. Those are my thoughts for tonight. Hope you guys have learned something from this video. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.